facts. I hope all of you will read that. But as his first child, the way I think of it, as opposed to oldest child, as the one who shared his name, as the one who went on medical rounds with him when I was in elementary school, and the one who, because of him, intended to become a doctor through the first couple of years of college. It was the second year of organic chemistry that began to divert me from that path. I thought about him not just through the heart, as we all have, everybody here, but also from some kind of distance, wondering about why he led the kind of life that he chose to lead. And I've had a couple of chances when I was able to receive a diploma on his behalf at Ursinus College. I was able to talk about what Ursinus had meant to him. And I thought about what Dad's life looks like, something from a distance. And the life, by saying the life he chose, I mean that in two ways. One is, Dad was only 30 years old when he got out of the Navy and brought us all here to become an internist at Beaver Medical Clinic. It's in the nature of things that his patients were one generation older than he was then, or perhaps two. And it was in the inevitable nature of things that as a young doctor, he would watch the great majority of his patients age and weaken and die. No matter how vigorous they had been, no matter how skillful and caring he was, and you know that he was all those things. He knew from his life every single day at work that there were seasons of life, times to explore and participate and expand, and times when that would no longer be possible. Most doctors know this from their work. Most ministers or religious officials know it too. But for most of the rest of us, it's very hard really to imagine ourselves at different times of life from the ones we are now. We see people a generation older and think, that will never happen to us. Dad knew differently. I think this is part of why Dad lived as fully as he did in all the ways we know and have celebrated. No one has ever cared more, or tried more, or enjoyed more, or learned more. You're about to hear a leitmotif. It's not simply about the speeding tickets. I've seen him in 3 speeding tickets, and he talked his way out of all of them. So it was an example to all of us. But to me, it was a nuisance that he made me get up at 6 a.m. when I was 8 years old to watch Greek lessons on educational TV. But in retrospect, it was more remarkable that he, as a 33-year-old doctor starting a practice, was doing exactly the same thing. Dad never actually said, to my hearing, carpe diem, seize the day, but he lived every day in that exact spirit. He lived as fully as he did because he knew, matter-of-factly, not gloomily, as my mother might have, knew that at some point this day we are observing today would come. He led the rest of his life knowing that there was a time for him to be joyful, and he was. There was another thing I've reflected about Dad, which is the intense, local, person-to-person nature of his caring and investment. I'm biased here by my own work, because as a journalist, I'm always writing about people who want their deeds, good and bad, to be known as broadly as possible. They usually want the good ones to be known. Sometimes we're writing about the bad ones too. And I'm myself in a business where people are, in a sense, seeking recognition on a broad scale all the time. And I know when I think about Dad that he was a person of boundless talents, far greater than most people I know who are renowned on the national scene or in the public limelight. But the fact is that he poured these efforts into the benefit of this community and these friends, and of course his family, and most remarkably his patients, people for whom he lived his full life. I'm going to read again just 2 paragraphs from this letter that was in the facts, because this is the kind of man, as Tom said, we didn't know where he was on Christmas, but this is where he was. This is from a young woman who, at 20, was diagnosed with lymphoma by Dad. I have no idea what strings your dad pulled or what family plans of yours got ruined, but he managed to get an operating room late in the day on Christmas Eve so that we wouldn't go through the holiday without knowing whether she had cancer. I knew after surgery that I'd know by the length of the incision whether it was a benign lump or a tumor, but I was not prepared to wake up in recovery and discover I was so thoroughly bandaged up that I would not be able to tell. I woke up by myself, but your dad appeared 1 minute later and said that he'd been watching so that I wouldn't wake up alone to wonder. And I'm sure the glimmer I saw in his eyes wasn't merely a reflection of the fluorescent lights when he told me the lumps were benign. The fact that he was there because he didn't want this patient, Aaron Cox Holmes, to be afraid. He poured these efforts into this community, into Redlands, into his patients. It's not at all that Dad was unduly self-effacing. He loved posting his certificates and recognitions on the wall of his house. I am today wearing his Harvard Medical School tie, which he proudly wore whenever there was the slightest excuse. But really, he was a man who cared about the doing rather than the recognition. That is why this letter from Aaron Coxholm, his former patient, and similar remembrances by so many people will stand as his true epitaph. Not that he was a leader of this organization or won that award, but that for so many people, he poured himself out in circumstances that no one else would ever know about, except the patient lucky enough to receive his attention. Dad did the right, kind thing because he was right and kind, because that is who he was. Now, since I can see my dad rolling his eyes and say la-di-da at this point, a brief return to reality. My dad was a wonderful man, but not an overly serious or pious or saintly one, as many of you know, perhaps best of all, Uncle Bob. He had his naughty and disobedient and unreasonable and flaring in momentary anger sides too. One of the first times my wife, Deb, met him was when he was coming to England for our wedding, and he nearly got into a fist fight at a train station in London because he thought somebody had bumped into him on purpose. So here, I was trying to explain to Deb it wasn't going to be that way all the way. But he had a naughty side and a disobedient side, and a not wanting anybody else to make rules for him. And in closing, I will quote one of the late emails I received from Dad. I received this on May 21st of this year. 4 days before that, I'd been able to speak at Ursinus about Dad. 3 days before that, it was his 83rd birthday where I joined him. And then on May 20th, I left to go back to China. This was after Dad's very serious illness in April, where we thought that he was nearing the end, where thanks to intervention by many friends, including Jim and Bonnie Wallman and Robert Klein, he'd been given a few miraculous extra months of life, thanks to his shunt operation. But there was one thing wrong in Dad's life, which was that Plymouth Village, in its prudential care, had assigned a, quote, minder to be in the room with him, and somebody who had to make sure that Dad was safe and competent to be in his house. When all the family were gone, when Helen couldn't stay there overnight, could Dad be there on his own? This is the email he sent me on May 21st of this year. I left about 9 p.m. on May 20th, and my dad atypically was tucking himself into bed early. I thought something was up. So the next morning I got this email. Dad says, last night the home care person, who is very smart and nice, came at 11 p.m. as planned, her goal being to make sure I am okay on my own. I purposely got up at midnight to carry out my silent, convincing act. I went to the thermostat and turned off the air conditioner, then walked to change the scanner on my computer. Then I got Dove Bar out of the freezer, opened it, and ate it. Then I washed my hands and brushed my teeth. I checked in with the caregiver, asked her if he had any problems, and went back to bed and sleep. It was convincing. No more caregiver or inspections. Ta-da! All is good here. I hope your trip is smooth in the good company of your family. Thanks to all of you for enabling me to recover and return to an enjoyable life. Much love, Tiger Jim. Much love and thanks to you, Dad, for the life you gave us all.
You didn't tell about him getting lost and staying on the mountain overnight.
Yes.
He and George Ryday and their horses were out for a ride, had no jackets, got lost, stayed overnight on the mountain. And what was the story about his clavicle getting broken and coming into your room and
With it sticking out?
With it sticking out and saying to them, how are we going to explain this to Mom? How are we going to explain this? Well, there's more. I want to invite the family, if others would like to say a word, How do you follow these professionals? We are going to ask you friends also to say a word, but the best laid plans of mice and men, I have to go get the microphone that walks around. And I will come to you, and you may say a word or two, and just so you don't get too worried or antsy, we have to be out of here before 4. Okay, because they have to reset the room for